Hello, beautiful ladies. I'm back, and I told you I'd be doing a second to end the kind of internal resistance, and we'll be doing a second part to this today because, as I said, this blog is kind of coming to a stop, a halt, and I really need to um, get this done. Today, we were talking about forgiveness and external focus in the last vlog, and right now I'm going to talk about guilt and abandonment fears. And then we're going to do the last part. Kind of, if this were easy, you would have probably already done this by now. And guilt is always a great one because I know most people, we can be guilty at times. We can feel guilty about things and stuff. And I want to tell you the difference between feeling guilty and there is a guilt feeling, and then there is what's called in this book godly sorrow, but really regret about doing something and stuff. But there's a difference between the two, and we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about abandonment fears when it comes to internal resistance to boundaries. Guilt is a difficult emotion, and it's not really a true feeling, such as sadness or anger or fear. It is a state of internal condemnation, and it is the punitive nature of our fallen conscience saying you're bad. And biblically, really, it's something that's legal and not emotional. It's not like fear, it's not like anger, like sadness, it's not like really even joy or peace, which is, a feeling. Guilt is just you really being hard on yourself. Um, Scripture teaches that we are not to be out from we are to be out from under condemnation. And I know if you've gone to church or if you're a Christian, such as I am, you've heard this before. I've definitely heard it, and it's still hard sometimes not to condemn myself regarding some things. And that guilt should not be a motivator for any of your behavior. You always should be doing things really out of love. That's it. You know, we are to be motivated by love. And the resulting emotion that comes out of love when we fail is godly sorrow, regret for doing something. And you know the difference between guilt and regret. I know when I'm in pain because I've really done something really bad, something that I shouldn't have done, and stuff. Not guilt, where I feel like, so and so, somebody's going to be mad at me. It's not that. It's the pain of having done something that you knew that you shouldn't have done, really, and sinned. This is contrasted with worldly sorrow, which is guilt. And guilt brings death. The guilt comes mainly from how we have been taught in our early socialization process. Therefore, our guilt feelings are inerrant. They can appear when we have done nothing wrong at all. And we have to be careful about listening to guilt feelings to tell us when we're wrong, for often the guilt feelings themselves are wrong. In addition, guilt feelings are not good motivators anyway. It's hard to love from a place of condemnation. We need to feel not condemned so we can feel actual regret about doing some stuff that looks at the hurt we have caused someone instead of how bad we are as people. Guilt distorts reality. Guilt gets us away from the truth and away from doing what is best for the other person. And know that, just think of how bad we are as people. Listen, we're all good, bad people. We all are, you know. And as much people say, "Oh, I'm good," listen, we're all good, bad people. We're both. And that's one of the reasons that, Jesus came, because we're good, bad people. We can do bad stuff. Depending on what happened, we can do really bad stuff. And so this thing of somewhere that somehow you need to condemn yourself because you're not always being a good person is wrong. The guilt that someone puts on you saying you're bad, you're bad. Now, and you can remember that if you were a child that was treated like that and treated in a manner that you were always guilt ridden because you didn't do what your parents wanted you to do or anything like that. And it wasn't as if you were a bad person, but you were treated bad. And you were treated badly and you were shunned and you were, and stuff, and you were punished for not complying. That's different. That's pain you shouldn't have felt. That's guilt. Um, this is particularly true when it comes to boundaries. We have seen over and over in this book how the Bible tells us to have good boundaries and to enforce consequences, to set limits, to grow up and separate from our families of origin, and to say no. When we do these things, we're doing right. These boundaries are loving actions to take. Even though they're painful, they're helpful to others. But our fallen consciousness can tell us that we are bad or doing something mean when we set boundaries. I think for many people, that's what the guilt comes from, the thought of I'm somehow being mean because I'm telling people no. And, and I don't really, like I said before, I find it meaner to not tell people no when you should. I find that meaner. The people with whom we are setting boundaries will often say things to reinforce our guilty consciences. If we have been raised in a family that said implicitly or explicitly that your boundaries are bad, you know what I'm talking about. When you say no to a request, you feel guilty. When you do not allow someone to take advantage of you, you feel guilty. When you separate from family that to create a life of your own, you feel guilty. If you do not rescue someone who is irresponsible, you feel guilty. And the list goes on. Guilt will keep you from doing what is right and will keep you stuck. Many people do not have good boundaries because they are afraid of disobeying the internal part inside their heads. There are several steps you can take to avoid guilt, but you must begin with the one realization. As most things, guilt is your problem. Many people without boundaries complain how so and so makes them feel guilty when you say no. No one makes you feel guilty, as if the person had some sort of power over them. The fantasy comes from childhood when your parents seem so powerful. No one has the power to make you feel guilty. A part of you agrees with the message because it taps into strong parental messages of the emotional brain, and that is your problem. It is on your property, and you must gain control over it. See that being manipulated is really your problem, and you will be able to master it. And I had to master myself the guilt. I remember when in my past marriage, the guilt that I felt at my ex-husband's manipulation. And although I wanted to blame it on him, really at some point I had to figure out, you know what, this is really me. I'm letting this person do this to me. And you know what? I don't have to let them do it. Own your guilt. Get into your support system. Begin to examine where the guilt messages come from. Be aware of your anger. Forgive the controller. Set boundaries in practice situations where you're supportive friends, then gradually set them in more difficult situations. This will help you gain strength as well as gain the supportive voices you need to rework your conscience. Learn informations for your conscience. This is where reading books like this and reading what God says about your boundaries will give you new information. And that'll become the new guiding structures in your head instead of those old voices. Learning God's ways can restore your soul and make your heart rejoice instead of feeling that controlling parental guilt. Acquire guilt. Now, it may sound weird, but you're going to have to disobey your parental conscience to get well. You're going to have to do some things that are right, but that make you feel guilty. Do not let the guilt be your master any longer. Set the boundaries and then get with your new supporters and let them help you with the guilt. Stay in your support group. Guilt is not resolved by retraining your mind. You need new connections to internalize new voices in your head. And do not be surprised by grief. This will be sad. It'll be sad if you used to being guilty. Like I say, if you feel guilty, you'll feel bad. This will be sad. But let others mourn you. Love you in that process. Mourners can be comforted. If you're mourning by the grief of having to tell someone no, or some of the pain you have to feel over feeling guilty, you can be comforted through that to strengthen your boundaries. Abandonment fears. Taking a stand in a vacuum. Remember from there's a developmental section in here that talks about boundaries, that boundaries come really after bonding. Um, Babies must be secure before they learn boundaries so that learning separateness won't be frightening, but new and exciting. Children who have good connections naturally begin to set boundaries and move away from others. They have enough love inside to risk setting boundaries and gaining independence. But if one does not have a secure bonding, setting boundaries is too frightening. Many people stay in destructive relationships because they fear abandonment. They fear that if they stand up for themselves, they will be all alone in the world. They would rather have no boundaries and some connection than have boundaries and be all alone. Boundaries are not built in a vacuum. You must be undergirded by strong bonding to save people or they'll fail. If you have a good support group to go to after setting boundaries with someone you love, you will not be alone. And I don't really know who that is for you out there, but whoever it is, you have to have support during this boundary. And I've said that again and again. If you've heard that again and again, you have to have support and it's people that will honor your boundaries while you're setting them. Being rooted and grounded in love with Christ, with the body of Christ, and God will be the developmental fuel you need to risk boundary setting. People often vacillate between being compliant and being isolationist. Neither is healthy or sustainable for a long time. That's not boundaries. Being compliant or isolating yourself, neither one is boundaries. You have to have support. Over and over in their hospital program, we've seen people in destructive patterns unable to set limits because they were working in a vacuum by themselves. They repeatedly say that the understanding support they received in their program fueled them to do the hard things they had never been able to do. If it were easy, you would have done it by now. Um, this chapter is about trouble. And if you're a Christian and know anything about the Bible, you know that Jesus already warned you. You're going to have trouble. There's going to be some trouble, but that you can take strength in Him because He's come to overcome the world, to overcome that trouble. Um, you know, Everything you're gonna when you start doing things this way, the right way, everything's gonna come at you, and it's gonna try to resist what it is that you're doing. The wrong way isn't working, but to do it the right way can be difficult. And we've always been warned about that. Narrow is the road that leads to life. To hammer out a godly identity takes a lot of courage and a lot of work and a lot of battles. Running into resistance is a good sign that you're doing what you need to do. It'll be worth it. Remember the clear message of the scriptures. When you encounter resistances, persevering to the end will bring great reward. These resistances are going to come. I promise you. And this book says, I promise you. I'm telling you myself, I promise you. People will resist your boundaries, especially if you have been compliant all your life. A bunch of people are not going to like this, and they're going to tell you in different ways. But if they didn't come, you would have established boundaries a long time ago. But as they come, see them in a biblical perspective. They are part of the long history of your sisters and brothers, people who have encountered many trials as they are ventured out on the road of faith, seeking a better land. This journey is always riddled with trouble, but also with the promises of our shepherd to carry us through if we do our part. Go for it. Go for it. Go for it. If you do these things, if you listen to this, if you read this book, your life will be so much better. Next blog, I'm going to be talking about how you measure success with boundaries, and there's an 11-step way for you to do that and measure your success with boundaries. I'm going to talk about some other things about my own life and setting boundaries and how it's led to a much better life for me. Setting boundaries and having boundaries with people, how it keeps me joyful, you know, happy, peaceful, when I set boundaries with people and stuff. it's just much better for me, and not resisting those things, or when the times when I don't have boundaries and stuff, how that can lead to a lot of frustration, anger, sadness, chaos, and stuff. It's a good thing. Boundaries are a good thing, and I want you to have them. So we'll talk about that next, and I'll be seeing you then, and then we'll talk about the close of the blog, and and stuff, and hopefully some stuff that I've learned by after being a blogger, and the hope is that you've learned something too. So I'll talk to you all later. Okay, bye bye.